Do do do, theme song. Do do do, I'm broke so this is my theme song. Do do do, just imagine this is an awesome theme song. Do do, theme song. Hello, welcome to Left of the Box. Bonjour, bienvenue. I'm Sandy. Today I have an interview with Sue Klassen, and we are going to be talking about restorative justice, a subject I am very passionate about. Before we get to that, please be sure to hit buttons. There's the like button, the subscribe button. Don't hit it again if you've already hit it, because that undoes the process. You can follow me on Twitter, and it would really help me out a lot if you became a Patreon, and then that way I could sustain this channel. Link is in the description box below. Without further delay, enjoy the interview. Hello, I'm Sandy with Left of the Box, and today I have with me Sue Klassen, and we are going to be talking about something that I'm very passionate about, and I hope a lot of people are passionate about, restorative justice. Hello, Sue.
Hi, Sandy.
Could you start by giving us some of your background as to why you got involved with restorative justice and how you have progressed with that?
Yes. I first learned about restorative justice in 1979 when I was at University of Waterloo at Grable College. And this was very near the time that restorative justice, the modern movement of restorative justice started, 1974, in the sleepy little town of Elmira. And I'll tell you, well, it was then. So I would be hearing about restorative justice at our community suppers, our weekly community suppers where the whole college gathered together and had speakers and a wonderful meal. And so I kind of caught the energy of restorative justice at that point. But just to nip over to that story from Elmira that really launched the movement, there were two youth who had some major losses in their lives, some difficult things had happened, and they maybe didn't have all the support they needed to cope well. But anyway, were quite drunk that night and had already been sent home by the police, but didn't go home, and had their beer taken and so on. But yeah, they didn't go home. They went on a rampage through Elmira, damaging 22 properties. They were doing slashing tires, breaking windows, overturning planters, just a rampage through the town. And it really shook Elmira. And they were assigned probation officers, and two probation officers were saying, what if we had these young men go up to the doors of the people whose properties they'd harmed and say, we're the ones who did this, and we are sorry. How much did this cost? We want to repair the damage to the extent that we can. Give us those amounts. And so that's what they suggested to the judge, and they expected the judge would say, well, can't do this because it's never been done. And at first the judge said, you can't do this because it's never been done. Well, but how does anything get started if you never do anything that hasn't been done? So the judge finally did say that's part of what they need to do, is to go up to these houses instead of going to prison, which they would have done. And so this was much harder than going to prison, to go up to all these houses, not knowing how people were going to respond. And some were really angry, and some brought out cookies and said, wow, we're so amazed that you've come and done this. But it really allowed them to show accountability for what they had done, instead of just being in prison, taking their punishment, right? And so they earned money and they paid back. They owned what they did. So from that time, that I kind of was infected with restorative justice. I think I was a carrier, but I wasn't yet showing symptoms. And so then my spouse and I moved to upstate New York, to Rochester, New York area. And when I heard someone there was starting a restorative justice organization, I felt an electric shock go through my body, and I just knew I had to be involved. So at first, like, because I had way too much on my plate already, but I was just involved a little bit, but soon, I was secretary of the organization, and then vice president and president. And by the end of my time there, by the end of a decade, I was volunteering full-time in a lot of capacities, including president of the board there. We saw such huge changes of schools adopting, whole school boards adopting a restorative justice process for their school, and seeing big changes in less absenteeism from students and staff, and better grades, and more connection. Lots of changes that way. Within the court system, we went from low-level cases to serious cases that would have resulted in prison, and saw huge changes in people being able to be accountable, be held accountable, to show up and want to make things as right as possible. So now back here, I'm involved in restorative justice in our leading a restorative justice discussion group in our women's prison here, GVI, and involved in various ways at different times with community justice initiatives. Community justice initiatives is the first restorative justice organization in the modern restorative justice movement. And we can talk about that later. I mean, restorative justice is as old as humanity, but our Western understanding of, like, we got it, mm-hmm. Is really started in 1974 with that case in Elmira, and community justice initiatives started shortly after that. So here in our KW area, we have just such a gem, and this sense that restorative justice we need to be a restorative justice region, city and region, and doing everything from a restorative justice lens. So yeah, while I'm not involved full-time with restorative justice right now, because my restorative justice work led me to trauma work, trauma awareness and resilience, and so I've been leading a lot of trainings around that and so on. But this restorative justice heart and spirit, it's just a way of living. It's a way to be. So. Mm-hmm. I couldn't be more passionate.
Yeah. What would you say some of the goals of restorative justice is?
It's sort of stitching together the fabric of society. Harm causes like a tear in the fabric of relationships, and which is restorative justice aims to sort of rebuild those ties, we'll make things as right as possible could be its slogan, right? That whatever has happened, the person who caused the harm has the opportunity to try to make things as right as possible. In the case of murder, you're not bringing the person back to life, mm-hmm. clearly. But the deep apology, the recognition of the things that were going on that were responsible behind that, it can start to get at some systemic factors behind things, right? And also there's the acknowledgement of the crime, just acknowledging it and then moving towards repairing that to the extent that it can be repaired.
So it's more about healing what happened versus just punishing somebody for what they did.
Yes, it is. And it's that deep level acknowledgement can be so life-giving for everybody. It's for the person who was harmed to get, here, I did it. I'm sorry. And for them to be able to say, this is the harm you caused. This is what it did to me. I haven't been sleeping. I can't concentrate. Mm-hmm. The rupture, the harm you caused. To describe that in its fullness, have that heard and acknowledged is huge. it's also very good for the person who has caused the harm to be able to begin to understand that a lot more, and to be able to make things right, begin to make things right. It can take a huge load off the person, or they may have stuffed it and denied it and so on. But to show up in that positive way and be there, it's so healing for them. And then for the community, we'll typically have members of the community involved too who have been affected. It's knitting the community back together too, because we're all affected when crime happens. You hear somebody's, even just going through neighbors' cars, or someone was shot. It doesn't matter what it was. We're all that ripple effect, that ripple of harm and fear goes through the community. And when you see people coming together to repair harm instead, it does have a healing effect on the whole community. Yes.
Yeah, I know for me, one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about restorative justice is a lot of the people who end up in the prison system, it's for crimes of desperation, despair, bad behavior, and for me, just throwing them into prison and and punishing them for things like traumas that have happened to them in the past, that doesn't, to me, solve the problem. What would solve the problem is targeting the root of what caused the behavior in the first place. Because people shouldn't be coming out of prison more broken than when they went in. And
absolutely.
And that's what I see the prison system as, because for me, the number one goal is to make sure they don't do whatever they did again, to end it. Because if somebody were to attack me and beat me up, rob me, there is that kind of visceral, you want them to, hurt. You want that vengeance. But when it comes right down to it, what I want even more is to make sure this never happens again to anyone else. And so if that means the person goes into a prison and receives help, treatment, and education, all that sort of stuff, so that when they leave prison, they have some accountability, they can contribute to society, they no longer need to express themselves in violent manners, that to me would make me feel better, and it would help the community a lot more, because now you don't have this person out there with that, that urge, that desire to harm others.
Oh, absolutely. And we can be so much smarter on crime if we behave exactly that way. There's a case in point is circles of support and accountability, or COSA, I'll call it, for those who are at high risk of sexually offending when they leave prison. So maybe they've maxed out their sentence, and so they don't even have any supervision. And that's not what we want in society. Is for people roaming the streets whose needs haven't been met, those traumas haven't been addressed, there isn't any supervision. That's no good for all of us. So circles of support and accountability, or COSA, forms a circle of support and accountability around the individual. And they have to say that, yes, they want that, but that walks with the individual, providing friendship and accountability. So they're always watching. Are you following any restrictions that there are on your movements? That you can't be around school, so you can't be in certain places. So they're very much, we'll call it as it is, but they're also, for some of these individuals, it's the first time they've had people that are in this kind of close, trusted relationship that, figures they may not have had parents or others who they could really bond to growing up. So it's tends to drop recidivism by like 70%. There's been studies worldwide. I know, when do you hear of anything that drops recidivism by 70%? And violent crimes like sexual reoffending be dropped by 80%.
Wow.
So if you talk no more victims, which is one of their goals, no more victims, no one is disposable. And inclusion rather than exclusion makes our communities safer. Those are some of their mottos. And I deeply, I'm just like, if we could have this for everyone, that there is support and accountability held together. This is not soft on crime, not at all. It's smart on crime, support and accountability together.
Can you explain a bit of the process of restorative justice from the person who's done the harm and the person who has been harmed?
Right. So say there's, let's just bring it into a school and say one kid, try to steal a backpack and another punched him out, right? And then there'd be we prepare both sides separately, right? So the kids generally be sent home on, have a suspension until they could come back to a restorative process. But we try and turn that around within a day, so kids are back in school, back involved. So we meet with each side separately to talk about what happened, who was affected by what happened and how, and then what needs to happen, for the person who caused the harm, who needs to, what do they think they can do to repair the harm? For the person who was, say, punched, what can they do to, what do they need? What do they need to be able to feel safe to come back to school and so on? So we prepare people separately, and that's hugely important to a successful restorative meeting. We might bring in a guidance counselor, perhaps, or the principal or a teacher, someone from the school who was involved and give perspective. And then we'd have 2 trained facilitators. We would have parents, or if there's a parent or guardian or somebody as a support person for each of the young people. And then we bring them all together in this circle and then do something that helps people recognize that we're all humans here together, right? Mm-hmm. At the start, just even introductions and maybe something you're enjoying in the springtime or something. And then we'd start off by hearing, what happened from each of the individuals. So hear the story from the different perspectives. And those stories we know beforehand that they're close enough that it's time to bring people together. And then the impact, right? The impact on those who were harmed. And then what's the crux of the impact? What's the greatest impact? And then go explore from there what needs to happen to make things as right as possible. Then there'd be a written agreement that's signed by all the parties, and which would include what happens if the agreement isn't met, right? But that follow through on the agreement is hugely important for this to feel that justice is done, right? That people have said we're rebuilding. We're repairing harm, and so that needs to have that follow through. So then from there, we'd, that agreement would be followed through, and then the individuals would be able to go back to school and have that follow through. But in all my years of restorative justice and the involvement with schools and everything I've read, when there's been something created between 2 students or 2 groups of students, when that is resolved, there isn't a problem between those groups anymore. It's not that these kids will never get in trouble in any way again, but who of us goes through life with just making one mistake,
I've made so many just yesterday. So.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And so, but that those long-standing, sometimes, we see these rivalries or these resentments that are going back for 6, 8, 10 years, and then coming together and talking it through as in this safe environment, this safe facilitated environment. People just like all sorts of stuff falls off, and people just go out lighter, more restored, seeing differently and behaving differently.
Yeah, so this is a lot about supporting the person who did the harm and helping them heal to make sure so that they don't do it again. And at the same time, helping and supporting the person who was harmed and supply them with what they need to heal as well.
Yeah. So it is good for everyone.
Mm-hmm. And both people agree to this?
Yes, absolutely. It's voluntary process. Yes. We never require a restorative process. You can't require someone to show up, take responsibility for something, to give a heartfelt apology, and similarly for the person who was harmed. If it's just like, no way would I go in and face that person. But if they understand the potential benefits, then when people do say yes, then it can be so powerful for everybody involved. I typically come out of a restorative process just energized and in awe of what we can do as humans when we create that safe space for each other.
What is one of the things you find the person who was harmed, because I can't imagine how difficult this would be to actually face the person who has harmed you. What is one of the main things that they are seeking out of this, do you find?
Some key things are acknowledgement that this happened, and that acknowledge and hearing a heartfelt apology, being able to see with their eyes that this is true, that they really are. They so often need to tell their story of what happened, the harm, how much this has impacted them, tell it in their words to that individual. And that can be very healing to them.
Yeah. I know that kind of strikes a chord with me, because personally, there was a lot that happened to me, especially in childhood and growing up with my family, that has never been acknowledged. And I've had to just kind of come to terms with the fact it never will be acknowledged.
Right.
And a lot of the reason why I don't talk to a lot of my family now is because they refuse to acknowledge me, the situation I was in. Like, there's one primary example of this when I was living in Toronto and I was struggling and I was on the verge of being homeless. I wasn't quite homeless yet.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it was a Christmas dinner at my aunt's. And at that dinner, I received a gift from my aunt, and it was a food basket with a pineapple in the middle. And I remember thinking that was very kind, because pineapple is one of my favorite fruits.
Oh.
But at the same time, it didn't quite sit well with me, and I didn't understand what was happening. But then later in that evening, I kid you not, they pulled out a map of the Dominican Republic and started talking about the resorts they had been to or were planning to go to. And meanwhile, I'm sitting there, I'm about to lose my home and go homeless. And I think the reason why the food basket ended up upsetting me so much was they understood what was happening to me, but they never once acknowledged it. They never once said anything to me about it, or offered support or offered help. It was just like I didn't exist to them. And over the years, just that constant lack of acknowledgement of what I've been through, I found I can't deal with a lot of the family members anymore, because I can't go and pretend like nothing happened.
Yes. Yes. And being seen and heard is such a core need of every one of ours.
Mm-hmm.
It makes me think of another restorative process. I mentioned that restorative justice is as old as humanity. Really, all Indigenous groups around the world that we know of have a process for repairing harm, that is relationship centered like this, that involves acknowledgement and taking responsibility and making amends and so on. And also, like, for example, our Indigenous peoples here in Canada have just rich traditions in talking circles where everyone sits in a circle and something of meaning or sacredness, like a feather or a stone or peace pipe, is passed around the circle. The person holding that is the one who can talk, and then it's passed, and each person can either speak or hold it and pass it on. And what would it have been like if your family had been able to sit with you and you tell what you're going through, holding that for as long as you needed to hold that feather or pineapple or whatever was meaningful to you right then, and then you would pass it on and hear people's centered heart response. And what might that have meant to you to really be seen and heard in that kind of way?
Yeah, because one of my biggest frustrations with them was I tried to reach out to them plenty of times and I just got nothing back. And because of that, I will never be part of the family in that way. Like I do have relationships with my mom and my sister. And they're fairly good relationships, but there's a large chunk of my family where I've come to terms with the fact they're not really my family.
That tear in the family between you and them, and there was nothing done to.
Yeah, it got to the point where I couldn't go to any family events. Like there was a wedding that I went to for my cousin, and one of the speeches that one of my cousins gave was talking about family values and all this sort of stuff. And meanwhile, I'm sitting there and I'm just ready to scream because they're talking about how family is so important and all this and that and the other thing. And meanwhile, I'm like, I was homeless for a year in the same city as them, and not once did I see them. Not once did they reach out to me. And so it just got to the point where I'm like, I can't. And I've come to terms with that. I've come to peace with that because I don't dwell on it. I bring it up as an example.
Yes.
But I don't miss them because what I had with them to begin with wasn't that great. So, and I've just come to terms with the fact this is my life. Not everyone has that supportive family, and it's the family around me that I choose.
Yes. Wow.
I do know how beneficial like a talking circle would be because my first year in college actually had a higher population of Indigenous peoples attending. And so there was an instructor at the college who was Indigenous, and he set up a conversation circle in at a separate building and stuff with like proper smudging ceremony and everything of that sort. And then we could go, and it was an eagle feather that we would pass around, and we would just talk about like what was stressing us, what was, if there was any conflicts at the college that was, getting us down. And just being able to talk about that took away a lot of, I think, the angst and the pressure and the depression that could come along with just being in college, just being with this group of supportive people and being able to say your piece about like, failing a class, or not that I did, I never. But just, the stress of relationships in the college or things of that sort, and knowing that it would stay within that circle as well. So you had the ability to talk about these deeply personal things and be acknowledged for it without it risking it going out to the wide public.
Yes.
And it was just such a beautiful healing process. And this is one of the things that I'm like, there's so much we could be doing better in this society.
Yes, and I talk about proactive and reactive restorative justice, and the circles like that are for being seen, heard, acknowledged in this safe, confidential space that's rooted in values, but actually living out those values, right? So that would be the proactive that builds a sense of community and safety, and then the reactive processes would be like when there's been a harm, and we're bringing people together to repair a specific harm, and both can be so healing, so life-giving. And it's saying with a higher population of Indigenous individuals and being able to come together with this beautiful process that's from their tradition. And we, through residential schools and so many colonial practices, the 60 Scoop, and so many ways we've disempowered and traumatized. There's so much intergenerational trauma within our Indigenous peoples. Why aren't we as colonial invaders in that sense, in prison, all of us? But instead, no, those we've traumatized are in prison at far higher rates than they are in the population, right?
Yeah, no, it's that the way this government, the way a lot of Canadians treat the Indigenous peoples of this land, it's especially with the news of the previous week and the mass grave that was recently found. There is just so much more we could be doing.
Yes. Yeah.
And it just kills me that, the Prime Minister, he's the person that's supposed to represent us and our values. And he just sends out a tweet saying, "I'm thinking about you." And it's like, yeah. That's not going to heal anything. Just empty words. But
yeah, and it's to each of us to do our own actions and to call our government to account, because in the end we are all the government. That's we each need to take responsibility on what am I doing and what am I calling my government to do. So I'm glad to hear you.
Okay, so back to the individuals that would be taking part in this process. What are a lot of the things, like the person who has done the harm, what is a lot of the things they have to do to make amends for, or examples of what they have to do to make amends for what they did?
So that's as individual as the particular circumstances, but it certainly can be financial restitution. And when people have gone through a restorative justice process, they follow through on financial restitution is so much higher than if they haven't, because they get it, like, oh, this isn't just like I'm supposed to do this. They're like, oh, wow, this really matters. Like, this is something I can do to give back, a little bit, to repair the harm a little bit. And then apology is also something that matters. They may need to give a speech at a local high school, for instance.
Isn't that cruel and unusual to make them do public speaking?
We never seek to make restorative justice punishment, right? That's not the purpose of it. But some things are very, very hard, right? But we also seek to make it always doable, right? That what would it take? Would it take like practicing this, 20 times with a counselor, and then having someone who's there on stage with you? But if you're called to do that, if you're asked to do that, then it's a matter of like finding out how you do that, right? It could be giving also volunteering at say if you've harmed an animal, that volunteering at a shelter for animals and being mentored and learning to care for that. Whatever the person harmed, and we could call the person victim, but a lot of people, they don't want to stay in that victim role, right? So they would rather be called survivor or but let's say the person who was harmed. Whatever they want, whatever is meaningful to them, they can ask. And that's discussed then, discussed and agreed upon.
And do you find the people who were harmed, do you find they come out of this feeling better? Because we know that it helps with the person who did the harm, but the person who was harmed, do they then have a better quality of life as well?
That is the general, there's, that is typical, that it heals things, that it addresses things, that lifts weight, allows people to move forward in a way that little else can, because you're actually confronting the person who, your nightmare, your worst fear. And you know that you're so strong to being able to do that, and see, often this person who's caused the harm becomes this monster in your mind, this outsized, huge monster. And the people come in and say, it's just that, that messed up kid who did that, like, really? And it brings it down to size. And then you see a little bit of the backstory too, and it becomes not so frightening. And it can alleviate a lot of fears, and just lift a lot of weight. So yes, it's so good for those who,
And what kind of crimes, because you mentioned that this type of justice is good for, like, the tire slashing, even all the way up to murder, this is still something that is good? Like, people still agree to this?
Right. So, in the kindergarten class, when one kid grabs another kid's toy, we don't have this, send everybody home, like, you have that restorative spirit and help kids see each other and repair harm right there. Right up to murder. With murder, people would still be generally in prison doing their sentence. The goal then is not, it's not instead of prison, but that it's allowing people to prepare. And for preparing when when there's been a murder happen, it's typically like 6 months to 2 years, sometimes even longer, that both sides are preparing separately under the guidance of facilitators, and then coming together. Those conversations can be 4 hours, 6 hours, 8 hours, with breaks. But it's not about repairing the harm, but about acknowledgement, about this conversation, getting answers to things that happened in the last moments of your loved one's life that no one else could say, saying, this is the life you took away. You need to know how this has affected me. It's typically lots of tears, but people are very clear by the time they go in what they want out of this, what's realistic to get out of this. And it can, for many people, be so healing. Just actually meeting with the person who took the life of their loved one. It can be so healing on both sides, but there's no agreement that comes out of that. There's no follow through. It is the being seen and heard and having your story told, and getting what you need to get out of it.
Are there any examples you're able to give of this process working?
Yeah. Say a young woman who had some difficult times with her family, and she went to live with her grandparents, and they gave her a caring home. and I guess she had access to their credit card and racked up a lot of, over $3,000 of expenses, and for tattoos and jewelry and things like that. And she was doing drugs and so on. But when she was caught, it was so violating to the grandparents who had given her this space to live and this care and trust. It just, so devastating. So she was going through drug court, and she was back in school, and she's did a lot of work on her own. And then this restorative process was then to look at repairing some of the harm between her and the grandparents. So it was her whole family. That is her mom. Her parents weren't together, so it was her mom and her some cousins and aunts and uncles and the grandparents and her drug counselor and just a few professionals that way, but about 20 people, including 2 facilitators, who came together, and she brought the money that she had stolen, from off her credit card. She had earned all of that and brought that and gave that to them in the session. But also there was so much of that deep remorse for the way she had behaved and treated them. And so the whole family system was witness to that. And family members said, they named things too that they hadn't always done well as a family, and some other pieces that they wanted to address, because it's all felt so good to them to finally to be able to talk about things, to have things acknowledged and out on the table, and harms named, and remorse. And so it was just so powerfully healing for everyone. And so supportive of her, then really staying on that new path that she was on, and not going forward just with that guilt, but with having known I did this hard thing with my grandparents.
Yeah, because I know there's been times when I feel like I've done something wrong or I've wronged someone, and I know how that can kind of stick with you too, but you're so afraid of acknowledging it sometimes, or like, what if? And so if you had that kind of support around you, and knowing that the other people, they're not just going to blow up at you and scream or something, that they've also been through the process to kind of help get you to the point where you can talk to them. I can't imagine what that would be like, really.
Yeah.
I've never done anything that's so bad like that. There's been the things I've done are very minor. And eventually I do usually end up making it up with the person, but.
That's a restorative process. It's the way healthy groups, healthy individuals have always handled things. You break the lamp, you apologize, you replace it if it can be replaced, or do something in that, and you say, oh, I guess I shouldn't play baseball in the living room, that healthy groups, you find out what that lamp, that was the one from Aunt Matilda, and it just can't be replaced, and it means so much to me. And so you hear those stories, but the relationships that go through that, it doesn't mean that people ever have to relate again, but you have cleared at least that. But often if they do choose to relate after that, then the relationship can be stronger than it even was in the past. And it's just so life-giving.
Yeah, I know, because especially in today's day and age with social media and stuff, it's so hard sometimes to take responsibility, to take accountability, because you'll have all these strangers just piling on you for like maybe this one bad tweet or this one bad thing that you did, versus looking at who you are as a whole. And that type of treatment can scare a lot of people into not wanting to do something like this. And sometimes I really wish that people would just take a step back and take a breath and realize that no one is defined by any one thing they did.
Right, right, right. And how can we create those safe places where people can make those decisions? Yeah. How can we support each other in doing that? Whether it's from, in our homes or in kindergarten right up through prison, in the workplace, it's in all our relationships. Restorative justice, yes, there's many programs, there's many processes, but really it's a philosophy, it's a way of being, and to live that restorative lifestyle of creating safe places for us to be live from our values and take responsibility, have accountability, support and accountability held together.
Yeah, because one of the things I've learned over my life is that when you see somebody do something bad, that's usually just an expression of a behavior and that's coming from something.
Yes.
The way I like to kind of explain it is a retelling of the boy who cried wolf.
Mm-hmm.
And because in the story, it's like this boy is sent out to the field to look after the sheep and he cries wolf. And they all say, oh, you just want attention. How dare you do this? And they go back and he cries wolf. And again, and they all come out and it's like, you're just being bad. You just want attention. And then eventually the child dies in this nice little fairy tale for kids. But to me, when I see a story like that, it's a matter of asking, well, why does he need that attention? Like, why are you sending this child out there alone if he's not equipped to deal with it? Why aren't you dealing with the issue as to why he's calling you out there, as opposed to just getting mad at the one reaction that he's doing to what he's feeling inside? And I don't think enough of that is going around. And in some of my videos, I've tried tackling it before where people are reacting to reactions.
Yes.
And it's hard to say. It's like, okay, so this person blew up because you said this one thing to them, but how many times that day was that thing said to that person? Where is that coming from? Did it open up an old wound? And so you're just getting mad, like, how dare you get mad at this, so now I'm mad at you for getting mad at this when I don't think it was anything, but to the person it meant something. The problem is it takes a lot of work. It's hard to go to the root of the problems. And it's not a simple process. It can take a long time. It can uncover things within yourself that you don't like, that you need to deal with. And so I can understand this kind of urge to just say, you're bad and walk away, as opposed to having that empathy and compassion and understanding. Because if somebody hurts me, again, the first instinct is you want them to hurt so they know what it's like. But the reality is, a lot of the time, they already do know what it's like. And they're lashing out because they're hurt.
Yes. Yeah, the backstories for so many of the women I know in prison are huge, hugely full of trauma. And it's huge. And it's why doing restorative justice in a trauma-informed way, like you've been talking about, is so so important. Yeah.
And could you see how this process could be used for things other than crime in the community? If there's
Yes, like truth and reconciliation processes are restorative justice processes. So looking at the systemic roots of what's happening here in Canada with our Indigenous peoples. So that process with truth and reconciliation processes, they often just get to acknowledgement and not. We have with our TRC, we have a list of things that yes, we are working on, but. Because it's I don't think it's one step to acknowledge what's happening. It's hugely, we both have said that can make a real difference. But then we also need to act on that and stop doing this. And so from small things like circles within the community or circles in prison, to TRCs, truth and reconciliation processes around the globe. Restorative justice is useful. Again, we're looking to have a restorative city, a restorative region here in Kitchener-Waterloo, and so that the justice system would be that, but all the schools would have a restorative base, all social services would, our community agencies would. What if our places of worship had that framework? The sports teams, to everyone have that philosophy and mindset that holds together support and accountability, right? That and has this trauma-informed lens.
Yeah, I know. I would love to sit down with the people that I often see online that are like, you get it so easy, we have a house and all this sort of stuff, and they don't understand what people my generation and younger are going through when it comes to finances even, and or with the fact that I'm on disability because of mental health issues, and they're like, oh, you get it so easy, and it's like, no, we live in dire poverty, like you don't understand. And to just sit down with the haves and really explain to them, this is what the world is like outside of your little bubble, and get them to see that, I think I would feel better about that, at least a little.
Yeah.
Or when it comes to things like police officers and how they treat people of color, Indigenous, Black people, like if every officer had to sit down with a group from the community and really connect and hear with them from them, I think that could at least help benefit the system until we abolish the police. That's my ultimate goal, but we'll start with this.
Yes. I know our local police had the men's their choir, of course, would sing with Mina Ore Kwewak Nagamawak, who was the Good-Hearted Women Singers, our Indigenous group that now they've closed in the past year, but I think just building those relationships so you start to know each other as people, and then you can when you see each other as people, then you can have these conversations about like, this really doesn't work with our community. This terrifies that out of us. And I know there are throughout North America, there's quite a few cities where the police have members of the police have had been in a talking circle with community members, particularly at risk community members that really need to be heard, because it can kind of see the other as the enemy. Mm-hmm. And when you sit down and see, we're all people with the same kinds of fears, and I mean fears for safety, because both sides have those fears of safety and assumptions, and but values. We want things for our families, we want things for our community, and to see each other as humans. It start to break down a lot of walls. I absolutely agree with you, Sandy, that would be, and for just community building in general across lines of economic lines and our political lines and racial lines, and all to bring in our great diversity and see each other as each other, right? I hear the longings, the gifting,
Yeah, because again, I know just selfishly there's so many people I just want to be mad at, but then take a step back and no, I can't. To kind of understand where they're coming from.
Yeah.
So what happened to those two boys from Elmira?
Well, I'm not sure about the one, but I don't know if anybody knows where he is. But Russ Kelly was, he's worked for CJI he worked many years for CGI and is still connected with CGI. In fact, he came to he spoke at a restorative justice retreat day in Grand Valley Institute, our women's prison, and the year before COVID, and shared his story, and was a huge, big hit, so inspiring to the women. But he first found out about about restorative justice when he was in a criminal justice class, maybe a decade after that fateful night. And he was just taking notes. There was a speaker from Community Justice Initiatives, Julie Friesen, sharing, and she started telling this story about this case in Elmira that launched the modern restorative justice movement. And he's writing things down, and that's awfully similar to mine. Okay, the parole officer was Mark Yancey. Oh, that was my parole officer. And then it's finally, he's kind of, probably all the color drains out of him, and like, oh my God, I think she's talking about me. So he went up and talked to her after, and so that's when he connected with the restorative justice movement, for which he was really in part responsible. So
wow, because if that kid had just been thrown in jail.
Yes. Yeah. Instead of being in criminal justice class and becoming an employee for community justice initiatives and doing so much good for so many people over the years, right? It could have been very different. And that stigma, that makes it hard to get a job, and just and who knows what else happens in there. There are many who can find help and healing in prison, but we could be a lot smarter in how we do things. It's almost always through relationship that people grow and heal, including in prison.
Yeah. It all comes down to what kind of community do you want to be in? Do you want to be in one that's healing, or one that's still breaking apart?
Exactly.
Oh, it's so important. I wish restorative justice was just the norm for everything, and then maybe we wouldn't need prisons, and we could then abolish the prison system. I understand.
Absolutely.
I understand. Some people, they're beyond help. I get that, but just
or beyond what we know how to help them so far.
But just the amount of people that are in prison now that don't need to be, if this was the proper process. It's amazing.
We could be a lot smarter. And so, one of the ways to get involved is through community justice initiatives here, or wherever you're listening from. Find a local restorative justice organization and get involved that way. Also, just look at the ways you can implement things in your house, right? In your life, your choices. How can you be more restorative? How call in CJI, or say get some support from CJI or another restorative justice organization for addressing a conflict that you're having, or a harm that you've experienced. And maybe there's something in the sports team, or wherever it is. With elders, CJI works with, when there's been like financial abuse or physical or verbal abuse for elders. Doesn't matter what age group or wherever, that sort of mentality can help.
Okay, amazing. Well, I'll supply links for people in the description box below about how you can find out more information. Are there any final words you would like to have on this particular subject?
Again, this isn't rocket science. It's the way healthy groups of people have always treated each other. What are the ways that we can grow this in our community? Because the places we've gotten away from this relational model of holding support and accountability together, that's of creating safe spaces where we can really hear each other. That's where we're hurting, but that's where we can also heal and grow.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you so much for this talk. It really it does kind of, the idea of restorative justice just kind of inspires actual sense of hope. And so hopefully more people can open up to restorative justice process. But again, thank you so much for this talk. It's been fantastic.
Thank you, Sandy. And celebrating appreciate your cheerleading for it. Great.
Salut, à la prochaine. Thank you for watching and stay tuned. I'm Sandy, wishing your tomorrow is better than your today.